Good morning and welcome to a special holiday edition of Rising. Great to be with you as you celebrate with your families. I'm Amber Duke, joined by Kevin Walling. Kevin, good morning.
Amber, good to be with you. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. It's good to be here with you on this special holiday week edition.
Yeah, it feels good and great to see everybody. We're going to get right into the latest news. It's no secret that Donald Trump swung a decent chunk of the youth vote his way this election. And although he lost the traditionally Democrat voting bloc as a whole, he did win the youth male vote at 56% per an AP exit poll. In 2020, he won only 41% of that group. Now, data from the U.S. Census Bureau shows that around 1 in 3 adults ages 18 to 34 live with at least one of their parents. There was a spike during the pandemic of this phenomenon, but the numbers have remained pretty stable in recent years.
A 27-year-old who spoke to CNBC in November said she moved in with her mom during the pandemic in 2019, and she ended up staying there after scoring a remote job to save money, saying, quote, "Why rent and give my money to someone else when I can start to my own?" Voters under 30 cited the economy and jobs as their top concerns during this election cycle, according to data from the AP. In the run-up to the election, Gen Z voters aired their economic grievances to MSNBC.
I'm 20 years old. Why is a one-bedroom apartment $600, $1,600? Like, oh my God, for 500 square foot.
One at a time, I said. Yeah.
Rent prices is outrageous, and then these jobs, they're bare minimum jobs. Like, I'm supposed to be in customer service. Before I was a server, I was working at like fast food restaurants, and nothing against them, love it, but we need them jobs. But why are you yelling at me over a burger? So it's one of those type of things. It's like the work life, trying to balance out school, trying to balance out finding housing. It's just overhyped. Like, I really waited my whole life to grow up and do this.
I was very frustrated. You know, it's very frustrating seeing these handouts being given out and the price of everything increasing. And when I go home at the end of the day, I'm still struggling. I'm doing everything I need to do, and it is extremely frustrating. And like the handouts and the foreign aid given out, why would you water your neighbor's flowers while your house is burning down? There is a serious problem that needs to be fixed here.
Amber, it's certainly been interesting to see the demographic shift, as you point out in the intro, the shift of young men to the former president-elect. Something, Democrats have had a lockhold on young people for the entirety of our lives, mostly, that we've seen. So it is interesting to see this shift towards this more Republican populist message that Donald Trump honed in on.
Yeah, I think a huge part of that was cultural, but getting into the economics, because that is a huge reason why people in Generation Z are choosing to live with their parents. A lot of people were very stunted by the high inflation. If you're graduating college in this period, you're going to have a hard time affording that entry-level rent, groceries, all of those things that you have to do independently once you move out of your parents' home. You've also got a student debt crisis, right? Where if you are graduating college at 22 and you have $100,000 in student debt, maybe
if you're lucky, sometimes
if you're lucky,
$250,000 in.
Yeah, maybe it makes more sense to live with mom and dad and save up some money and start to pay off those loans for a bit. And then there's a housing supply issue where inventory is very low, demand is very high, so rent prices are increasing significantly every single year. I think for a lot of these young people, they sort of take the tack of, well, what do I have to lose? The economy was seemingly much better when Trump was in office the first time, at least on the inflationary aspect. So let's give him another chance and see if we can get some of these prices to stabilize, maybe affect the housing demand with the mass deportation program even, right? Because in places like New York, there is a mandatory housing requirement for illegal migrants. I think that they are ready for a change because they don't feel like the economy right now is working for them.
There's certainly that disconnect. I wonder, Amber, your thoughts on, has the pandemic shifted, our thinking on this as well, when so many of us moved back home to be with our parents? I know many folks that were living in D.C., New York City, with really high rents just said, the heck with it, I'm going to move back home with my folks. I can work from anywhere. I wonder if that's also shifted our mentality and made it even more acceptable for young people when they graduate college to just stay at home.
Yeah, definitely the hybrid working environment where a lot of people either only have to go into an office several days a week or don't have to go in at all definitely makes it more enticing to live in a place where you can save money. There's obviously some dangers to that, right? A lack of independence, the inability to have that character building moment where maybe you kind of live in a dump and you have 5 roommates and you have to learn how to deal with all those
character
different
building for me,
personalities, right?
certainly.
It was not easy, but I thought that it was worth it. It definitely made me more grateful for what I have now. But another huge part of this that people don't really talk about is that people in younger generations are waiting longer to get married and start families. And they often blame that on economic reasons, but at the same time, it goes the other direction too, right? You're more likely to live at home if you're not married yet.
Yep.
So I think that's a huge part of it.
And likely less likely to bring that date home
Exactly.
to watch a movie if you're sharing that television with your parents in your own living room.
So you might say, I live at home with my parents because I'm not married, but maybe you're not getting married because you're living at home with your parents. It's sort of
a vicious cycle.
Yeah, double-edged sword to be sure.
But again, the interesting thing too, and I think you raise an excellent point with the student debt issue, and the fact that so many folks are just saddled with this huge burden that they can't get out from under because of these exorbitant costs that these colleges that have these massive endowments are strapping these students with, because student tuition is so easy to come by with these grant makers and with these debt servicers, that there is a huge issue with just the overwhelming amount of money that these folks. I remember Barack and Michelle Obama talking about this when they were running back in 2008. That they had just recently paid off their loans. He was a sitting U.S. senator. She was obviously a healthcare executive. That it took them that long with law school and undergrad to pay those loans. And again, we see this crisis, playing out across different societies, segments of our population.
And one of the impacts of that is that Gen Z is now more likely than millennials, apparently, according to some reporting from NPR, to go to trade school or pick up a trade as opposed to going to a 4-year college and getting a degree, because they feel like they're not getting a good return on their investment to spend all of that money to potentially take out all of that debt. And maybe you have a higher earning potential, but how much of that gets eaten up with the exorbitant cost of tuition or living in student housing? That's another cost on top of tuition, right? Yeah. Room and board. So according to this NPR report, Gen Z is being called the tool belt generation. And I think this is a great development. I've always said that instead of continuing to pour massive government subsidies into colleges, that we should consider giving people more opportunity to learn hard skills and go through trade school or even community colleges, because you can often get a really secure and well-paying job after a minimal amount of schooling, 1 or 2 years, and you're not saddled with the debt. So that's a huge difference. We also see Gen Z opting to go to public schools in the South more than
go Gamecocks,
more than some of the northeastern more expensive schools. One, for cultural reasons, which we touched on earlier, but also because usually it's cheaper.
Yeah.
And you can get a lot of the same benefits of a college education there than you would going to Harvard or Brown or Villanova.
Yeah. No, Amber, you make an excellent point, especially on the technical school front. I was part of a campaign a few years ago. We did the paid media behind an effort to increase funding for technical schools, right, vocational education in the state of Oregon, and we've seen a boon in that effort where a lot of students aren't necessarily ready for college or interested necessarily in a liberal arts education. And they can work with their hands, they can build something, they can produce something, and they can make a great living off of that, oftentimes beating out, folks that go to a 4-year liberal arts education and get a degree in philosophy or, English. And these are the folks that are plumbing, that are electrical engineers, that are building this country. We see a major manufacturing boon thanks to the Joe Biden administration, I would argue. And we're going to need those folks to build these roads, these pipelines, these electrical infrastructures that will power our future.
Yeah, and look, not everybody needs to or should go to college. And I think millennials were really sold a bill of goods on that front, where it was hammered into us from a very young age that
keys to the middle class, they said.
In order to be successful, you have to go get your college degree. And for some people, that was the right decision. For a lot of people, it wasn't. And I think we're really starting to see the consequences of that. We're going to cover more here on Rising right after this. Stick around. Two-time Academy Award winner Sean Penn slammed the Oscars for, quote, extraordinary cowardice. He was alluding to the newly released biopic, or biopic, depending on how you say it, The Apprentice, which is about a young Donald J. Trump. Here was Penn at the Marrakesh Film Festival.
That the producers of them, the Academy, have exercised really extraordinary cowardice when it comes to being part of the bigger world of expression, and in fact have largely been part of limiting the imagination.
Penn went on to praise the movie about our next president of the United States.
The Apprentice. It's kind of jaw-dropping how afraid this business of mavericks is when they get a great film like that.
Penn continued, quote, when something sneaks through, it is to be celebrated. Certainly he's not winning any best Oscars for that interview. I don't think. He seemed to be struggling quite a bit.
Yeah, do you think he was hungover? Jeez.
Yeah. But, you know, obviously you're going to have actors and actresses, directors always critiquing what's included in the Oscars, what's not included. I think politics has seeped into everything, as we know. This was obviously a controversial movie. I remember just a few months ago, before it was released, them struggling to even find a distributor for that movie, The Apprentice, about a young Donald Trump coming up in New York City, Amber.
Yeah, and there were a couple of scenes in it that were apparently pretty graphic about the president-elect's alleged sexual misconduct, which was one of the reasons why people had an issue with it. They didn't want to stray into the lane of being defamatory. And then Sebastian Stan, the actor who plays Trump, talked in a recent Actors Roundtable, whatever those things are called. They talked to another actor. It's like very fun and insider Hollywoody. He was talking about how some people apparently would not appear on the round table with him because they didn't want to be associated with the Apprentice film. And I wasn't really clear, though, on whether that was because they didn't want to give the appearance of supporting something that elevates Trump's profile, or if it was because they were under the impression that Trump was going to win and they didn't want to be associated with something that was negative for Trump. Maybe the latter, because of what we saw with like the Washington Post and the LA Times. But I mean, obviously, weird developments around that film. I haven't seen it. I don't know if you have.
So I did, just because, you know, on this show, others, we've talked about it because of the controversy of it. Funny enough, you know, I found Trump in this role, I thought it was well done and well produced. You know, the actor from Succession who plays Jeremy Strong, who plays Ralph Cohn, does a really impressive job of capturing
Michael Cohn?
Roy Cohn.
Roy Cohn.
Yep. You know, Trump's fixer from back in the day. Right. I actually, you know, there were that scene that you mentioned in terms of the sexual assault. I actually found Trump in the role to be a sympathetic character almost.
Really?
Where he, you know, the opening scene is he's struggling to collect rent from some of the public housing that Fred, his father, owns in the city, and getting spit on and thrown out and kicked out. And attacked, and it's the story of a young kid really just trying to come up and make a name for himself, you know, in this relationship with this fixer early on, you know, building Trump Tower and building that empire that then led obviously to the TV show The Apprentice, and now this two-time presidency. So even as a Democrat, I found, again, the role of Trump in this story to be almost sympathetic and work against some of the, maybe, you know, I'm a moderate Democrat and see some sympathy with that, you know, struggle to make a name for yourself. But Sean Penn isn't doing the film any favors by coming out there and saying something like that, I don't think.
No, and Sean Penn doesn't exactly have the greatest history either. I mean, he has been accused of domestic violence and abuse and all kinds of nasty things. So, yeah, usually putting the Sean Penn stamp on something is not the biggest endorsement that you could ask for. And also, the committees, whether it's the Oscars or the Grammys, clearly do not like being told what to do.
Certainly.
Whenever these films or albums or whatever they are get pushed really hard by people, they tend to kind of shirk away from that. One story I always remember when it comes to the Grammys specifically was it's an indication of how quickly they can turn against something, and their opinion is very unlikely to change. Back when Lana Del Rey gave her first Saturday Night Live performance, which was widely panned because she was not great at live singing at that time. It was more, she was a recording artist. There are anonymous members of the Grammys committee who have said that they would never take her seriously again after that. So even though she's had these hugely successful and critically acclaimed albums since then, she has oftentimes not been under Grammy consideration because of that initial first impression. So maybe something similar is happening here with The Apprentice. They just don't want to touch anything that has to do with Trump.
And anything controversial in that regard. Amber, I wonder too, I'd love to hear your take on, it seems like, Hollywood has always been a bastion of the left, Democrats. Joe Biden, before he dropped out of the race, raised, a record sum of money at an event in L.A. with George Clooney and others. But we're seeing, the Reagan movie, for example, with Dennis Quaid. We're seeing almost a little bit of a dance with some actors, actresses, directors feeling a little bit more comfortable to come out necessarily as Republicans or conservative or have some conservative leanings in a way that we really haven't seen from Hollywood in a long time.
It definitely feels like there's a cultural shift in normalization of conservative themes and also of supporting Donald Trump. I mean, whether it's all the athletes doing the Trump dance, right? And none of them really got canceled for it. Previously, there was a conservative anonymous group for members of Hollywood that was run by Jeremy Boring, who is now of the Daily Wire, where if they were secretly conservative, they could find these like-minded people and talk about their ideas without getting canceled by the rest of Hollywood. That group ended up dissolving, but now maybe you can talk about things more openly because there was this huge popular support from the American people for Donald Trump, for conservative ideas. So we'll see if that actually translates to the production of film. I think Reagan's a great example. You have some Taylor Sheridan projects. People have been criticizing Yellowstone for the ending where the Duttons...
Don't give anything away.
I won't give anything away. No spoilers. But if you've been watching Landman, there's a lot of conservative undertones in that, overtones actually in that show. And those projects tend to do really well with a broader group of people because it's kind of refreshing to see that in entertainment.
And Hollywood, like any industry, and they might be a little late to the game, to your point, Amber, follows the money, right? Mm-hmm. And the viewership and ratings and what's resonating with the American people. And again, Ronald Reagan was the president of the Screen Actors Guild. Maybe we'll see, back in the 50s, maybe we'll see a resurgence of more conservatives playing more of a leading role based on where the industry is headed and viewership is headed in Hollywood.
Yeah, we'll definitely see. I think it's more likely to happen now than at any time in probably the past 2 decades. But we're gonna keep
the show in D.C. and not move it to L.A.
Yeah, sorry.
No about that.
Sorry, guys. If you're in D.C., you're stuck with us. But we're gonna cover more here on Rising right after this break. Stick around.
Cenk Uygur is the host of the Young Turks, a progressive news channel, and he's been a committed progressive leftist voice for years. He has long been frustrated with the direction of the Democratic Party, particularly under President Joe Biden. Cenk even decided to run against Biden, seeking the Democratic Party's nomination in 2024 as a protest candidate against the Democratic establishment. Now, you might expect Cenk, a leftist, to be demoralized by Trump's massive victory over the Democratic Party, but that's not exactly the case. He recently wrote on X, "I've been trying to figure out why I'm more optimistic now than I was before the election, even though I was so against the guy who won. I know now, MAGA is not my mortal enemy, and neither is the extreme left. My mortal enemy is the establishment, and they have been defeated." He also wrote, "I've now met tons of former Democrats who felt pushed out of the party. You can get angry at them or say you're glad they left or you didn't want those kooks anyway, but you keep doing that enough times and you start losing the popular vote." Cenk Uygur joins me now in studio. So glad to have you here, my friend.
Thanks, Robby. Appreciate it.
So I found that tweet really interesting because I kind of feel the same way, and like, even though you and I are coming at this from very different political angles, like you, I was not a fan of a lot of what Trump had to say. I like some of the things he tried to do. I think he was thwarted by some even worse people in the Republican Party over the course of his first term. So I didn't expect to be excited when he won necessarily. I didn't vote for him. I've told our viewers that. But when he won, and then when he started putting in interesting, different people for his cabinet, some of whom I disagree with, some of whom I won't like. I don't like Rubio that much. But it's interesting. And there's a possibility now for some change in our country, in our governance, that it's exciting, if nothing less. Maybe it's just exciting because it's something different to talk about for once. But I do feel a little bit more hopeful than I have in a long while. Can you flesh out why you're feeling that way?
Yeah, definitely. So, look, I get people's reaction to it. Glenn Greenwald today tweeted about how the DNC loyalists hated that tweet more than any tweet in history. Okay, and so if you're a DNC person, you're like, rah, rah, establishment. Oh, no, the establishment has been defeated. Oh, we're so sad. Right, I get it, but that's why we're feeling this optimism. And our audience, of course, left wing, etc. And a lot of people wrote in and say, yeah, that's how I felt, okay? And the reason isn't because we're excited about Trump. The reason isn't like, oh my God, we found Jesus and it's Trump. Right? No, what it is the establishment has been oppressing all of us for so long and gaslighting us in a way that is unbearable. And as I wrote at the end of that thread, although maybe a threat, I'd rather be in the populist woods than in an establishment prison, right? And the guardrails on TV, New York Times, Washington Post, Democratic Party are so narrow, and you cannot say anything that is outside of those guardrails. So after being browbeaten for saying, hey, why don't you guys try to actually pass some damn laws, right? Why don't you try for paid family leave? Why don't you try for public option? Why'd you take the $15 minimum wage out? And constantly hearing, oh, you don't understand. Bow your head. Bow your head. You must listen to Democratic leadership. Democratic leadership. I remember back in the Obama days when I would criticize him from the left, and they would say, he's playing four-dimensional chess. You wouldn't understand. Well, all right, how did four-dimensional chess work out for you on Hillary Clinton?
Yeah.
On Joe Biden,
The
barely
drone
winning,
strikes
by the
were
way.
part of a bigger plan, don't you see?
Oh, yeah, of course. How did it work out in Kamala Harris? How did it work out with senile Joe Biden? As everyone on television lied through their teeth.
Yes.
Oh, he's young and dynamic. You should see him behind the scenes. Really? He was holding back how dynamic he is behind the scenes? But on camera, he'd come out and be like, hold on, I'm going to fake it. Oh, guys, we got a defeated Medicare. Come on, you guys are such obvious liars. So the fact that mainstream media has been broken and the establishment in a lot of ways not completely defeated, but at least took a huge blow, that's what's leading to the optimism.
And when Joe Biden got swapped out by the establishment, by the leaders of the Democratic Party, by the money, the financiers, the media itself, when they wanted this done, then he got switched, and Joe Biden was dead in the water. Kamala improved on his odds a little bit, although it didn't come close enough. But the campaign she ran, in my view, was exactly the campaign the establishment would have wanted to have to a T. It was exactly along their terms. It was the same people. No wonder she could not, now that we heard on that Pod Save America episode what they were doing, advising on her campaign, we now know it was the exact same people responsible for Joe Biden. So of course she couldn't say, or was never prompted to say, here's what Joe Biden did wrong, and here's what I would do differently. In an election where the people could not have said more clearly that we want change, she refused to say what she would change, what she would do differently, because it was the exact same establishment. They had more power over her, frankly, in my view, than they had over Joe Biden, who was, kind of an old cantankerous guy and was always going to say and do whatever he wanted. She was going to do exactly what they advised and did, and she lost horribly.
Yeah, I'll go further. Look, so all these years they've told us, oh, trust the guy behind the green curtain.
Yes.
There's the wise men, and you people would know, please.
Oz the Great and Powerful.
Exactly. So they told us that on Hillary Clinton, she lost. And they said it's an aberration. It's an aberration. Oh, he got lucky, whatever, right? The Russians, etc. Then when Kamala Harris lost, they said the same things. They blamed the voters. Oh, it was Latino men and how sexist they are. And it was black men, and it was the progressives. Right? They always blame the voters, right? Yes. And now the veil has been lifted, and the American people can see. The Democratic establishment is full of crap. They don't know anything. I'll go way further. This is like stuff you can't say on television. Okay.
We're on YouTube, so go ahead.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's the different things you can't say.
Right. Democratic leadership are morons.
Yeah.
That's why they lost.
Yeah.
So they can't adjust to the times. They can't see that we're in a populist mood in America. And they're like, oh, we've got a great strategy from the 1990s. And remember, Jen O'Malley Dillon and that entire campaign team were the people who knew that Biden had dementia because they dealt with him every day. And they covered it up. They're all giant liars, right? So those liars who are telling you, oh, Biden's fine. His uncle might have been eaten by cannibals. You don't know, right? Okay, I mean, look at the preposterous degree of their lies. And then those incompetent losers take Kamala Harris's campaign and they sink it. They're like, oh, we got this. We'll just spend $1 billion, but we won't do any interviews. And by the way, so stop blaming the voters. You know who's terrible? The DNC's terrible. You know who's terrible? The Biden campaign team that turned into the Kamala campaign team. And yes, Kamala Harris, she was an awful candidate. Talking about bringing her back, how much do you want to lose? I see, as Robby, you pointed out accurately in the beginning, I don't want to lose to the Republicans. I don't want to lose to Trump. And they just keep losing and losing and losing. And they're like, oh, Cenk, you're the bad guy for pointing out the fact that we're a bunch of losers. Well, the whole country knows. It's not like you're the president. You blew. If Trump is this terrible and this dumb and this all these things, then why'd you lose to him so many times?
Right.
Right. What does that make you?
Why did he gain with the voters that have been loyal Democrats for cycles? He's clearly doing something right. On some level, you just have to observe that he has done something correct, even if you don't like it, and come up with some effective strategy to counter it. And they're still, and we'll move on to a different topic in a minute, but they're still, obviously this week the big news is that Joe Biden, served up Democrats a turd sandwich, forced them to reckon with him breaking this promise not to pardon his son. And you've seen a lot of Democrats, some Democrats, I don't know about a lot, saying this was a bad move and I'm against him doing this. But why have I not seen the names, the people who are being floated as potential 2028 candidates, like Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, Gavin Newsom? They haven't said anything about it. And I think that's a starting point. Just say, I understand he's a father and it's his son. This was not a good idea for him to break his campaign promise, and I'm against that. Just say it and move on. So
I know why they're not saying it, because they're corporate talking robots. And they have not yet received their script. They're waiting for a script, loading. Because here's what's going to happen, Robby. At some point, Democratic leadership is going to want to anoint someone for 2028, right? So when they go to do that, these guys, if they're on the wrong side of it, anything they say against Biden will be used against them later. I know, because they've done this to me dozens of times. Oh, you said this about Obama. Aren't you a terrible Democrat for saying that? But hey, brother, I was criticizing Obama from the left. I said, hey, maybe we shouldn't do drilling in the Gulf. And then the drilling in the Gulf blew up 3 weeks later. You criticize Obama. You're a right-winger.
On the Republican side, you can have caused you could have said Trump was Hitler and be his vice president. It's just like all gets forgotten. It gets forgiven once you get on board the policy agenda.
So real quick, Robby, on that, that's exactly right. And they kept pushing people out of the party. Okay, you're outside the guardrails. You won't do what the professionals on TV say, which is make sure that you're helping corporate donors. Okay, you're a no good populist. All right, well then you pushed everybody out of the party. And you lost the popular vote, okay?
That's what happens.
So when they lie to you in 2028, do not believe their lies. Do not believe the man behind the green curtain.
We're going to pause right there and then continue this conversation, which we'll release over the weekend. You won't want to miss the rest of that. Cenk Uygur, everybody. Stay tuned. Continuing my conversation with Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks about how the establishment has wrecked the Democratic Party's prospects. Another thing I wanted to get into is I'm identifying a couple Democrats who, again, they're saying what you're saying. They're not saying, well, now we're big Trump supporters or something like that. But are there areas where we can work together? I've really appreciated things I've heard from Democrats who are all over the political spectrum. Jared Polis, Ro Khanna, even Bernie Sanders the other day said, you know what, Elon Musk is right about the defense budget. Is there a way we can work together to identify waste, fraud, abuse, areas where civil liberties of Americans are being violated? So I think it was Representative Moskowitz said he would be part of the Doge caucus if that meant making DHS run more efficiently. That all sounds good to me. And yes, there are areas where progressives and libertarians can agree on government overreach. We're going to disagree when it gets down to entitlements, but fine. In the meantime, if there are things we agree on to do less surveillance and spying on Americans, I'm sure there's lots of things Kash Patel wants to do that you won't like, but if he said, there's way too many FBI agents doing surveillance and spying and intelligence works that the CIA is already doing, doesn't need to be done, keep them on a crime-fighting task. That sounds good to me.
Yeah. So this breaks down in a couple of categories. First of all, on the things that we agree on. So I wrote a tweet to Elon Musk basically saying, hey, if you want to cut $2 trillion out of the government, I can help you by cutting 20% of it overnight, $400 billion from the Pentagon. Put me in charge, put me in coach, and I'll cut the Pentagon.
Yeah.
So look, I didn't expect much from that tweet, but what happened next was super interesting. Number one, tons of right-wing populists said, hell yeah, let's go cut the Pentagon. Now pause there for a second. This is not your father's Republican Party. When I know because I've been around long enough to have fought your father's Republican Party, and those guys were unmovable. They were the establishment Republicans, just like the establishment Democrats are unmovable, and they were like, no, the Pentagon must always be doubled. We must always attack and create more wars, right? So now you've got a guy saying, then Elon Musk, okay, so the voters say, yeah, Cenk, this is Republicans saying let's cut the Pentagon. Then Elon Musk jumps in and goes, you got any suggestions? Now, I run the largest left-wing network, not just online, but probably anywhere.
You do?
Right? No Democratic leader has ever asked me, hey, Cenk, you got any suggestions? Because they're not open to it. Because all they say is, okay, what do my donors want? I'm going to do what they want. The rest is just fraud, right? So in this case, I'm eyes clear and wide open here. Elon Musk is a donor. He's a billionaire donor, right? I know that he's going to want to cut some agencies that I'm not in favor of, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, et cetera. And I tell right-wing populists, everybody be careful. Be careful about Trump. Be careful about Elon Musk. Definitely be careful about Miriam Adelson and the war she wants to start for Israel, okay? And Rubio and Stefanik, et cetera, are there to do that.
Yes.
So now, having said that, then Don Jr. jumps in and goes, hey, that's, oh, when I said to him, a suggestion is, hey, the generals have a conflict of interest. They all join defense contractors afterwards. And so they have a huge incentive to funnel billions of our money to their future employers, right? And Don Jr. jumps in and goes, hey, that's a good idea. We're already working on it. So I'm going to take yes for an answer. But much more importantly, then Ro Khanna comes in and goes, all right, let's pick up that thread. Let's do it. Let's cut the Pentagon together. Then Bernie jumps in and goes, come on, put me in, okay? And I'm happy to defer to Bernie Sanders. Put him in, coach. Imagine if Bernie Sanders was in charge of keeping the Pentagon honest. That would be the biggest act of bipartisanship of my lifetime. So Trump could rock the Democrats' world by saying, yeah, Bernie's in charge of making sure we cut the Pentagon, but we do it right, okay? And that would be spectacular. And what would happen? The rest of the left, as they're doing now, would yell at me, Ro Khanna, and Bernie Sanders.
Yes, and I would be fine with that. Most MAGA Republicans would be fine with that, with Bernie Sanders having a larger role over the Pentagon specifically, because this is an area of agreement. But exactly as you said, the people who won't like this are legacy media, establishment, liberal figures. I see them come after you all the time, increasingly. I see them come after your co-host, Anna Kasparian, for like noticing that, you know what, crime's kind of a problem and people are really annoyed about it, and there needs to be more of a perception that Democrats are going to do something about it, or they're going to lose ground to Republicans. That's just like an honest evaluation of reality for which you and Anna have been attacked by mainstream people saying, see, we told you these people were like secret right-wing grifter, whatever, and they're revealing that, when it's clear that you're just doing what you said you always believed, that it's a textbook progressive view, for instance, that sometimes wars are started for a lot of reasons, but one reason is the incentive that people going directly from arms manufacturing to lobbying to actual decision-making in our government have an incentive to see the world in a well, conflict. At least we make some money doing it. That's a textbook progressive thing to think. And for sounding the alarm on that and wanting Democrats to be involved and to work with Republicans on ending that, they're going to say, well, see, we said you were right-wing all along.
So, I mean, there's so many ironies there. So if you say we shouldn't cut the Pentagon, wait, that makes you right-wing, historically, right? Yeah. And if you say, no, the generals should be able to cheat any way they like and get really rich off of robbing us blind, how is that a left-wing position? That's not at all a left-wing position, okay? So the reality, Robby, and this is super interesting, is it's no longer left to right spectrum. It's populist to establishment spectrum, okay?
Yeah.
Because the establishment left and right, so-called left and right, wind up constantly agreeing, oh yeah, we should start that war. Oh yeah, we should do more corporate tax cuts. Oh my God, we should help the rich more. We should help our donors more. And then the corporate propaganda, otherwise known as mainstream media, comes out and goes, oh my God, we have wonderful bipartisanship. And the bipartisanship has corporations and rich people winning again. Undefeated, the rich, right? And I hate it. I loathe it. I don't care if a Democrat says it. I don't care if a Republican says it. I'm a populist left-wing guy, and I want the average American to win. On the other hand, are there things to worry about? Of course there are. Kash Patel has said some terrible things. And if he's making an enemies list and he's saying, oh, I'm going to get rid of the FBI as it is, but I'm going to put in my own political version and we're going to target our enemies, brother, you missed the memo. That isn't what this is about, okay? So I know you want to do your revenge tour, and I know that some of MAGA is in favor of that, but what I'm seeing now on right-wing show after right-wing show, and in all the reactions that I'm seeing is there's a lot of right-wing populists that are going, no. We're not here to do your weirdo fascist authoritarian thing, etc. We're here to actually take back the government for the American people. Now, you got to put them to the test. Are they going to or are they not going to? But last night I'm watching Fox News, and Laura Ingraham is talking about cutting the Pentagon.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
No,
Take the win. Take the win.
I agree with you. I say this to right-wing populist people. You know, the enemies list, the bluster about revenge. Especially if you're talking about, you know, mainstream media people, and some of that is just bluster, like, you know, we're attacking them, I'm criticizing. I don't think they should be investigated. That's a free speech violation. You know, let them do their thing. Also, it's like punching down. This alternate media ecosphere that you and I are a part of from YouTube and other social media platforms and just independent channels and networks, even on TV, the gatekeeping of the mainstream media is dead. They are losing relevance. Their audiences are shrinking. Elon is like considering pity buying MSNBC. I would be against it on principle doing, you know, investigations or retribution anyway, but it's totally unnecessary that people are getting their message from a wider variety of sources that sometimes have bad information, sometimes have good information, although that's true of the mainstream as well, always has been. I think it's broadly a good thing that it's more diverse and fragmented, and you can't just have one narrative dominate anymore. That's what's happened. That's the reality. It's a good thing for thinkers like you and I who are outside the establishment in different ways, and that has won. That ecosystem has taken hold and it's not going away unless they somehow regulate it out of existence with some change to internet law, which I do worry about. But other than that, they can't do it.
So, Robby, you're exactly right, and that's what the optimism is about.
Yes.
Mainstream media is broken, and I love it. Because they'll say, oh no, we are the truth, and you rabble-rousers in online media, you're all disinformation. Really, brothers and sisters? Is it information or disinformation when you tell us that the donors don't control the politicians? That the politicians are honest actors, and they're having an ideological debate. Oh, Lindsey Graham has this ideological position, and Chris Coons has that ideological position. No, they don't. They take donor checks, and they serve the donors.
Yes.
If I said this on cable news, which I have, and I was a host on MSNBC, they walk you out the door. Shh! You can't talk about how all the politicians are crooks. And now we could scream it from the rooftops. Sorry, mainstream media propagandists, your central lie has been exposed. The politicians are crooks. They're not honest actors. They take donor money and they serve donor money. New York Times should be absolutely embarrassed every time that they talk about a bill or a piece of legislation. They never mention the donors when the donors are driving 90% of the agenda in those bills. And they're like, oh, golly gee. Do billions of dollars affect people? No, I am an objective mainstream media journalist, and I know that billions of dollars never affects a human being. Okay, well, if you're going to do that lie, don't tell us you're objective. What you're doing is you're privileging your corporate perspective as the objective position, when it most definitely isn't. And it aids and abets corruption, and I love that that system has been broken. And I'll add one more thing real quick, Robby. If the right wing wants to, and the Trump administration, I should say, wants to prove that they're for real, there's so many easy steps. One easy step is, Kash Patel, look, again, you do the enemies list, okay, then we're going to fight back like crazy. Okay, we're not going to let you just arrest people.
Well, we'll talk,
stuff.
yeah, I'll
right.
cover it too.
Yeah, and so, but here's a guy, we all agree, right wing, left wing, moderates, independents, the only people who don't agree are the establishment.
Yes.
Free Edward Snowden.
Yes.
Okay?
Oh, yes.
What? I mean,
Please.
Trump had 4 years to do it before. Of course, establishment guys like Biden, Obama, et cetera, aren't going to do it.
No.
Okay? To be fair, Obama did a pardon at the end after he tortured Chelsea Clinton. He pardoned her. But Biden didn't do it. Trump didn't do it. But now it's a new day. It's a new day. Okay? The right-wing populists definitely want Edward Snowden freed. Left-wing populists definitely want Edward Snowden freed. Free him as soon as you get into office. It's a nice beginning of a proof of concept. Let's start to unite on things we actually agree on.
And Joe Biden has a couple more weeks left in his presidency. If he's cognizant and conscious, I don't know. But he could do a mass pardoning of political prisoners for that reason. Snowden, Ross Ulbricht is someone who's very important to libertarians to be released. Nonviolent drug offenders, find some of those people, release them too. What if he'd done that alongside the Hunter pardon? Could have deprived some of the oxygen of people saying this is hypocrisy and just selective favorable treatment for your son. You know, and then I hear, well, he still has a couple weeks left. I'm like, okay, I'm sure he's going to be very active, you know, letting people giving people a second chance in the last couple weeks of his presidency. I'd love to see that, but prove me wrong, Joe Biden. You got time.
Exactly right. Look, Joe Biden's a corporate tool, okay? Yes. And he's not a nice guy. That's another giant lie of the mainstream media. Oh, Joe Biden's so sweet. He's the guy from Scranton. He's not the guy from Scranton. He's been in Washington, D.C. for the last 50 years.
But the empathy, Cenk, the empathy. You can feel the empathy.
Yeah, so this is what got proven as a gigantic lie at the end, right?
Yeah.
So the guy who has all this empathy didn't mind losing to Trump and stayed in the race while he had dementia.
Yeah.
So no. Oh, the guy who's all for the Democratic Party. Oh, well, he's so unselfish. He loves the Democrats so much. No, he's like, me precious power.
They had to threaten to humiliate him so ritualistically to get him to go. And even then, I thought there was a time I kind of thought he was just going to hold on. Yeah. They couldn't make him. They could drag him through the absolute mud, but they couldn't make him go. They had to threaten. They had to start using, you know, in the New York Times, not taking out his ums and ahs as he stammers over his speech to say, this was what every transcript of your interview will look like till you're gone. And then they finally got him to say, okay, fine.
Yeah, and then his advisors agreed with me after a year of saying he's outrageous and terrible and how dare he. And now on his way out, the advisors were like, he had a 0% chance of winning. He was going to lose 400 electoral college votes. And so he's going to be humiliated. But that's not all. Biden then says, oh, I care so much about my son, and I have to pardon him because he's such a, persecuted, et cetera. How about other people's sons and daughters? How about the 15,000 Palestinian children that were killed with the money you sent to kill them? Okay? So don't tell me Joe Biden's a sweet guy when he financed a genocide. And that goes in history, over 44,000 dead. Gaza's a slaughterhouse. Don't tell me that Joe Biden is empathetic in the room to a politician or to a donor and expect me to go, oh, no. When it's Palestinians, he's like, kill him, kill him, kill him. Who cares? Where's my check? AIPAC, where's my check? And mainstream media, you goddamn liars. Are you ever going to say that Joe Biden took $11 million from AIPAC throughout his career, that was his top donor throughout his career, and that maybe, just maybe, that might have affected him? Are you going to say Kamala Harris took about $5 million from AIPAC, $6 million from J Street, and the reason they get that money is do what Israel commanded of you? And he did. They were willing to lose the election. They were willing to lose Michigan. They were willing to lose everything to not defy their donors.
And Kamala Harris did not articulate, that could have been an area, where she said, this is something I disagree with the president on, or that we've been, you could even make it a platitude. I mean, I wish it would actually go further and be a different policy, but she could have really distinguished herself. She didn't at all. See, and the media let her off the hook. They said, oh, yeah, this is so different. And so, well, no, it's not. It's the exact same policy. It's not different whatsoever.
It was 0% different. 0%.
Yeah.
So why didn't she do it? And it cost her Michigan, potentially. And she knew it could cost her Michigan, and it could cost her the whole election. And, oh, Trump's a fascist, and he's a Nazi, and he's going to take over and destroy everything.
Yeah.
But I don't want to defy my donors.
Yeah.
Oh, so your donors are more important than democracy, okay? So the idea that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are just, golly gee, we just natural-born Zionists, for no reason at all other than our moral compunction, we decided to back ethnic cleansing. No, it's the money. It's the money, Lebowski. So, and by the way, I don't want people to get the wrong impression. Israel is an interesting example. Yeah. It's not the only issue at all. In fact, it's only one of all the issues. So drug companies, big pharma, spends 4 times as much money as AIPAC, okay? You think we're not negotiating drug prices because that's normal? No, no other country on earth has this insane law where the drug companies go, this is what you must pay, otherwise you die. No government accepts that, except the U.S. government.
Trump just put the person drug companies hate the most in charge of the Health and Human Services Department, RFK Jr. Someone I have some areas of agreement with, some areas of disagreement with. I don't, you might feel differently about this. I don't personally have some, like, desire for the federal government to be, like, hunting down red dye or whatever, or saying there's not enough choice in Skittles. But I do know we've become a sicker country than a lot of our peer nations. And what are their policies? Are there subsidies for protected industries that is making our food and our drugs less safe or more expensive? Or what is going on? Let's peel back some of that. Let's see if there are areas to work together. I'm sure there's going to be disagreements, but that sounds fine to me. And of course, establishment people, the theme of the day, losing their minds over it.
So look, RFK Jr. is an interesting example. So I disagree with him on vaccines. I disagree with him on fluoride, etc.
I agree with him that they shouldn't be mandated and that he shouldn't be censored for talking about them, but I disagree with him on the actual science of it. Yes.
Right. So, but he had when he was running, he had a really interesting housing policy about how private equity shouldn't be allowed to buy our homes, because if they buy residential homes, they're going to drive us out of the market, and that's the biggest wealth creation tool that the American middle class has. If we lose that, we become indentured servants to corporations for the rest of our lives. He had a really great anti-corruption plank saying, hey, we got to get an amendment to get money out of politics. But did the mainstream press talk about any of that? Whether it was like the things that they disagreed with or the things that were super interesting that nobody else was talking about. No, dead bears, worms, whales, etc. Why?
There was a unique animal fixation.
Yeah. So look, RFK Jr. has led a colorful life. Okay, so maybe it's a target.
Who among us?
Yeah, but well,
no, that was a joke. Very much not.
So, but why do they focus on that? Because it's character assassination.
Yes.
Mainstream media hates talking about policy. They don't want you to find out that private equity is buying all your homes and that you're all going to serve corporations under corporate rule for the rest of your lives. So shh, don't talk about that. Don't talk about corruption. Let's talk about dead whales and dead bears and, oh my God, and whenever there's anybody who causes trouble, all of a sudden there's a sex scandal, okay?
Yep. I know more about Pete Hegseth's romantic life than I do about how his policies might differ from the previous Defense Department in terms of Ukraine, Israel, and the global conflicts unfolding. Isn't that stuff more important for picking this person? And I might not agree with what I learned about the individual. It's so focused on the personal, and that's been a major problem.
Real quick on that. Look, some are more guilty than others when they go looking for a scandal. Like, I thought Madison Cawthorn was a good example of a guy who really didn't do anything wrong. Like, I disagree with him on his policies. I disagreed with his rhetoric. But I'm like, you got pictures of him partying.
Yeah.
And, right? And by the way, you apparently had all those pictures, but you never used them until he went after the Republican establishment, right?
Yeah.
So anytime anybody goes after the establishment, all of a sudden pictures pop up and scandals pop up. Now, in Hegseth's case, he probably had it coming. But to your point, he shouted, when he was drunk, he did the sexual stuff, etc. But he also, with a buddy, kept screaming one night, kill all Muslims, kill all Muslims. And it turns out he might be a neocon. Wait a minute, the right-wing populists hate neocons. Why aren't we talking about whether he might be a neocon? Why aren't we talking about, in his book, he wrote about how the Israeli military or government could be used to oppress left-wingers in America. What? Is the Secretary of Defense going to use the IDF on American streets against American citizens? That's an insane position. Imagine if instead of shouting, kill all Muslims, he had shouted, kill all Jews, kill all Jews. His nomination would be done, but we're not talking about any of that substance. We're talking about sex, because sex sells, and sex is a good way to do any character assassination the establishment.
And you and I know, and I always say this to right-wing people who flirt with interest in bringing in police or surveillance or anything. We know, and a lot of the Trump people have learned, this will always be used against you too, and it's a dangerous road to go down. We got to leave it there. Cenk Uygur, thank you so much for joining me in studio to hash some of that out. More Rising right after this.
You're fired. 2 words employees never want to hear. But this next guest took what could have been a devastating, career-crippling experience and turned it into a string of opportunities. In her new book, From Fired to Fabulous, former executive Beth Solomon writes about embarrassing dismissals in her career and how she used those moments to catapult her into better jobs and higher pay.
Here to share more about her professional fiascos is Beth Solomon. Welcome, Beth, to Rising. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here, and glad to be here and not be getting fired.
Us as well. Well, listen, there are going to be a number of federal employees come January 20th of next year that are going to be looking for a new job. What are some of your top key advice points for some of these folks that are looking for their next opportunity?
Well, that's right. And the president has said that those employees, for instance, who don't come back to in-person work in the office, that they are great candidates, that they will be fired. And that's up to 10% of the federal workforce. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, which could obviously be devastating. The thing is, getting fired is extremely difficult. It's humiliating, embarrassing. I remember many times just the shock and awe of it. And you feel like you're a disappointment to your family. You feel like you're a failure. The hardest part is just dealing with that, that difficult, the worst day of your career is what it always feels like, and worrying about your finances and your family and what's going to happen next. My view is that it's always really a good opportunity. It just doesn't feel like it in the moment. And what you have to do immediately is reach out to your contacts and start talking with people. You need a public story that, in this case, if it's true that there will be this kind of slash and burn, and who knows, I mean, we remember Elon Musk bringing a sink into Twitter, meaning let this sink in, most of you are going to get fired. So this could happen. And if those employees do get the axe, at least it's not going to be for performance. It's just going to be a phenomenon out of their control, but they need to be ready for it. And frankly, we all need to kind of future-proof our careers by networking, by being prepared, by being financially ready. Because these bumps and bruises are going to happen. And the truth is, the workplace is getting more transitory because of technology. It's a fact of life.
If people do get fired for performance, let's say in other cases outside of the one that we're talking about with the upcoming trimming of the federal government, what would be their story that they should present to a potential employer after getting fired? How do they talk about their departure from that previous job?
Well, that's a great question. So I say there's a private story and a public story. Your private story is what you tell your friends. Those bozos, I can't believe they did this. They're so wrong. They're so stupid. They were unfair. That's your private story. Tell it to your friends. Tell it to your family. They're going to support you. You need to vent. You need to feel the grief and the frustration of it. But then you need a public story. And the public story is very brief. It doesn't assign blame. And it moves the conversation to the future, to a topic you want to discuss. So you heard the private story you might tell. The public story version of that might be, it was a good run at the trade association. Time ran out. They decided to go in a different direction. It's a great opportunity for me. So what do you see in the marketplace happening in our industry? So you want to move the conversation from what just happened and make it brief. You're not assigning blame, and then move it back to the topic of what happens next. I'm open to opportunities. What do you see? And can I send you my resume?
Beth, I love this book, From Fired to Fabulous, and I think one of the key points in it is sometimes just employing good old-fashioned manners in terms of engaging with your network with potential employers. Why is that so important, and why is that seemingly sometimes lost with these kind of generations that are coming up behind us?
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, because Generation Z has a big problem here. And they were caught in the pandemic. Many of them did remote schooling, they did remote working. And the truth is, they don't know how to interact with adults. They don't understand the expectations of the workforce. So they are getting fired in record numbers. It's really a national crisis. Something like 10% of managers say they don't want to hire Gen Z, and another 10% said they will always avoid it. So we need to do something about that. So I do think, and the reason it's not happening is employers think this should be happening by universities, and universities are saying, no, we don't do that. We're teaching, learning and information, not human behavior. But you're right. A good practice of your career that everybody should be doing is build your network, help other people. Networking is not just contacting, making new acquaintances to help you move forward in your career. It's also being ready to help other people, because people get fired, people lose their jobs, people get passed over all the time. And part of a sound career strategy is building your network of contacts and being helpful to people when they're in trouble. Because when you're in trouble, and it inevitably happens, not just in Washington, but in every industry, you want to be able to reach out to those people and say, you know what, I got fired. Can we have a cup of coffee? And then, to your point, you want to treat those contacts and certainly people you're interviewing with respect. I say, send an email thank you note right after the interview and follow up with a handwritten note. Good manners are so valuable, and they do magic in professional life. So I hope everybody thinks about this, because it's so simple. It's something you can teach yourself. And then I hope we really address this crisis that we have with Gen Z. We can't afford to have a lost generation in the workforce.
I'm glad you mentioned the handwritten note after an interview. That was something that I learned in one of my first internships that has been incredibly valuable to me in my career. In your book, you share some personal stories about times where, unfortunately, you were let go from your job. Can you share one of those stories with us and how you leveraged what could have been a really low point into a better opportunity?
Yes, indeed. I was fired so many times. I've been fired more than anybody I know, which is why I decided, wow, there's a story in all these terminations and pink slips. So one time I was the CEO of a very small trade association in Washington, and it was the springtime. It was budget time. My chairman, vice chairman, and treasurer wanted to meet with me, and I thought, oh, great! I bet they're going to give me a raise, because it was like an overturned car in a ditch. This organization, it was in a sea of red ink. The IRS was writing letters like, you are about to lose your nonprofit status. The accountant had gone to Florida and nobody could contact her, so nobody knew how much money the organization had. But I got to work. I was the new CEO. I basically opened my laptop in a Starbucks and eventually hired a team of great people, and we turned it around and turned the revenues around. So I really thought in this meeting, like, this is going to be good news. And I had like bagels and muffins and coffee and tea. They came in. I said, oh, what would you like? And the treasurer said, shut the door, Beth. And I thought, oh, that's abrupt, but he was kind of a tough New Yorker. So I jumped up and shut the door to the conference room. And then the chair was a small woman with curly hair. She pulled this stack of papers out of her briefcase and she started reading from it. And like her hands were trembling, like the papers were flapping so loudly. It was like birds' wings that you could hear. And she started to read, and she said, the board of directors has decided to terminate your employment effective today. On and on. We've decided to go in a different direction. You can clear out your desk now, or we can pack up your things and ship them to you. Do you have any questions? She said. And I just sat there like, you're in complete shock, and you're thinking, oh my God, this is crazy. What am I going to do? I can't believe this is happening. Is this a movie? And so I said, I do have a question. Why? Why? That's my question. And they looked down and they looked at the ceiling and they said, we've decided to go in a different direction. And I said, well, was it anything I did? And they said, we've decided to go in a different direction. And so I was so shocked, and I had this new team of young people, and I said, well, could I just talk with my team, because I just don't, I want to be able to explain this to them, and I don't want them to feel the shock that of this. And they said, your team has left the building. So they had had this all planned out. Now, this was 18 months after I started the job. They ended up paying me for a full 2 years, including several health insurance. So had I known up front that I would work for 18 months and be paid for 2 years and essentially have 6 months to figure it out and be paid, I would have said, absolutely, where do I sign? I just didn't realize at the moment I was kind of a turnaround agent. I was the change agent, but I probably wouldn't have been a good fit, just like, managing a kind of a static place. And so, I realized then it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I had plenty of time. I like redesigned my bedroom, and I got a lot of things done in my house, and I ended up with a great series of new jobs. And it wouldn't have happened unless I had been fired. I did worry about, was it something I had done? And I talked, you can torture yourself with this. You replay the conversations. When did it go wrong? When did I get on the wrong side of him or her? Was it that, thing I reported that, but my view is don't do it to yourself. Give yourself time to grieve. You may need some wine or other things. Give it a few days.
Yeah, lots of wine for sure.
It was lots of wine for me.
Lots of wine is always a good remedy. Beth Solomon, thank you so much for joining us on Rising today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. All right, that's going to actually do it for us today on Rising. As always, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.